food security issue on there. So anyway, that's a direction we're kind of thinking of looking at in there. And I would entertain anybody's comments here throughout the day. I'll be around here and thoughts on that on there. But right now we've got to move in. We've got a speaker that I'd like to introduce here next, and he's really been helpful to us, done a lot for RCAF. And his name is David Muraskin. Yes, go ahead. I can hear you. Go ahead. I'll repeat it.
One of the things I would like to see is on back, and that is every 10 years we need to have a vote on it.
Mm-hmm.
Put us through what we're trying to do here a year or two ago. They made that so onerous or so difficult that trying to get a producer vote on it, that it makes it almost impossible. We need to have it automatic. Every 10 years we get a vote on it.
He's saying we need it every 10 years. We need a vote on a referendum vote on that, and it could be either a typical referendum vote now is either up or down, or we could ask for a referendum vote of changes to be made too in there, along with that vote at the same time. A lot of people say every 5 years, and I'm thinking that too. You know, if you go back to 1985 when they claimed that the majority of us, and it was actually the majority that were present, that voted on there, which was a real slim majority. Most of those people since then have come in have never had a vote on this checkoff, and they deserve to be brought up to a vote on that. And that's a good point that needs to be put forward on there, on that. Go ahead. Well, that figure is, yeah. How many dollars have been collected since the inception of the checkoff? And I've seen that figure recently, and it's been kind of confirmed that it's over $1 billion. $1 billion, and we've lost all this stuff that I had on the first slide. Hasn't helped us a bit on there. Okay, I want to finish with introducing David Muraskin. He's the litigation director of Public Justice Food Project. He's going to give his presentation will be on the beef checkoff in court. David S. Muraskin is the litigation director of Public Justice Food Project. The Food Project uses strategic litigation coupled with base building and storytelling to address the structural and institutional inequalities upon which our current food system is built. Muraskin's docket focuses on consumer labor and constitutional litigation. For his work, he has been awarded the National Press Photographers Association's First Amendment Award and named the Law Dragon inaugural list of environmental and energy lawyers, the only attorney recognized for working on food justice. He teaches food and environmental law at George Washington University School and previously taught at George Washington and Vermont law schools. Prior to joining public justice, David prosecuted key TAM litigation and served as the Alan Morrison Supreme Court Assistant Project Fellow with Public Citizens, and he clerked for Judge James L. Dennis on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He graduated from Stanford Law School with distinction, has a master's degree in force mitigation from Oxford University, St. Anthony's College, and received a bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago with highest honors. Please help me welcome David Muraskin.
Vaughn, before he comes on, had several people request if we could keep our sidebar conversations, either take them out in the foyer or outside, because people are having some difficulty hearing Vaughn as well, and David's going to be on Zoom, so that's going to be hard enough to hear too. So if we could keep our chatter down, please, and if we need to have the sidebar conversation, if we could take them out in the foyer or in one of the ante rooms, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Thanks, Vaughn.
Thank you. Can you hear us, David?
Oh, good. I'm not sure I was on, but hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully we're all set to go. Thanks so much for the introduction, Vaughn. And I think I'm going to pick up exactly where you were going, which is I think we, at this point, through the litigation that RCA has been doing, we can prove that the checkoff is costing you money every single time you sell cattle. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the litigation that we're doing, but the most important thing is the expert analysis that we've had generated in that litigation. So I'll start off with some law. I apologize for that, to give you some context. Hopefully it won't be too dull, and then we can really get into what I think is the meat of this, which is that we've been able to study and prove just how much the checkoff is costing you. So I'm going to share a screen and show you a presentation. Just give me 1 second, and we'll get started. That's my email, so that's probably not very useful to you all. There we go. So by way of context, RCAF has been litigating against the checkoff for years now. It started as constitutional litigation in which we argued that the checkoff was compelling you to speak for companies that you did not want to speak for. And we actually were pretty successful in that litigation, in that the initial court ruling said we were right. They were forcing you to speak for corporations you didn't support. What happened was USDA got involved and put in place these contracts which claim to control how the state councils, who spend half the money that you get and who fund the federation, or sorry, half the money that you hand over, and that fund the federation that Vaughn was referring to, it put into place these contracts that said USDA was actually going to control how these councils operate. We disagree that that was actually amounted to meaningful control. We think there are lots of problems with these contracts, but the courts ultimately held that they got around the constitutional problem, that they were sufficient to turn what the state councils were saying from private speech, which the Constitution prevents you from having to support, to government speech, that effectively they turn the expressions of the state councils spending half the checkoff money into expressions of the government, and through taxes and everything else, we can all be forced to fund expressions of the government. And so the court said there's no longer a constitutional problem. But we all knew that the checkoff was continuing to cause harm to ranchers and independent producers. And so we worked with RCAF to think about how do we keep this in the spotlight. And so we sued not over the constitutional issue, but over how the MOUs, these contracts, were actually promulgated. Basically, we said that you all should have had the opportunity to say the MOUs should be different, and you weren't given the opportunity to comment on those MOUs. And so we should be able to go back in and tell USDA they should do it differently, limit how the money's spent, change how it's spent, change who it goes to, and you at least deserve the opportunity to express that voice. Government tried to throw us out of court. We defeated that motion to dismiss, and then we are gone to the process of proving up how you all are injured by the checkoff. What the government said is basically no rancher can actually show that they're injured by the checkoff, and so even if we should have gone through the notice and comment process, we don't have to be hauled into court this time because the ranchers aren't injured. They don't have standing to be in court. And what we're operating under to try to prove your standing is, I think, a doctrine that will make a lot of sense to people in the room. It's basically that when the government increases competition against you, it causes you a harm. So if you could be operating in a smaller market, if you could be operating in a more differentiated market that could get you higher prices, and the government's homogenizing your goods, making all beef look the same when you guys know that you produce different products than your competitors, that is an injury, and it's an injury the law recognizes. So that's the theory we're operating under, and I hope it resonates with all of you. But as I said, to me, the most important thing about this case is not the law, but the facts we were able to gather. So we commissioned a study from this expert out in California. Dr. DeMofte is a professor at San Diego State University. He specializes in marketing research. He has a degree in psychology, a degree in marketing. And we asked him to examine the checkoff. And he did this by putting out in the field, so sending out through established survey mechanisms, 6 different surveys. So one nationwide to try to cover how all different consumers across the nation operate, and then one in 5 specific states, which we were focusing on for the purposes of the lawsuit. You see these up on the screen. It's Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. He ultimately tested the responses of more than 1,000 people between the nationwide surveys and the specific state surveys to understand how the beef checkoff is influencing them. And how did he do this? So he took two specific ads. The ad that you see on the left side of your screen is a nationwide beef checkoff ad. This is run by the Federation. It's put in different publications around the nation. You've probably seen things like this. It's the standard beef checkoff advertisement. It's, what does it say? Eat beef. It doesn't matter what beef you eat. It doesn't matter who made the beef. It doesn't matter how the beef was processed. Eat beef. That's all it says. And our theory was that when you're told to eat beef and all beef's the same and all beef is equal, that means that you're going to choose the lowest dollar beef. And that means that people are going to try to get the cheapest beef regardless of where it comes from. And they might prefer domestic beef if they understood that there were differences. And so what we tested on the right is the exact same ad. They should look exactly the same to you, except we added this very tiny print at the bottom that says beef that's produced domestically, uses high quality feed, advanced standards of care, and a limited carbon footprint. Just some factual statements about what consumers might recognize to differentiate domestic beef. And what happened was the 1,000 consumers divided into groups. Some of them saw ads exactly like the one on the left, and you'll see other similar ads that we tested from the beef checkoff around the states and around the nation in the next couple of slides. And some of them saw ads like the one on the right. And the question was, how does that make them understand the beef market? How does that make them change what they're willing to pay? And the results might not surprise you, but as far as I know, this is the first study to scientifically establish exactly what Vaughn was saying, that the beef checkoff is costing you money. So the adjusted ad, the one that has the extra information, the one that's unlike the ad that you're now seeing on this slide that says just eat beef, but tries to explain that there are actually differences in beef. So when you saw the adjusted ad that explained differences in beef, consumers regarded beef less as a commodity. And commodity here is a term of art. It means that the people regard beef as interchangeable. So when you see something like a commodity, like paper, for instance, you generally are willing to buy whatever paper there is. And you go, and as a result, what economics teaches us is you choose the cheapest paper. Well, when you see an ad like the one that we mocked up for the beef checkoff that just said beef can be different, you no longer saw beef as a commodity, or at least some people no longer saw beef as a commodity. I can't say this was true for everyone, but some people stopped seeing beef as a commodity and started seeing beef as something that they should look for the differences, and that they should start going to their grocery store and trying to figure out who made their beef, where did it come from, and they would actually put in that energy. And we know that when they're willing to put in that energy, that means that then the packers will look to buy the products they're purchasing. They want to purchase. And what's the second thing that we found? That if you specify that domestic beef is different, people are willing to pay more for that beef. That they are willing to pay more and they're willing to seek out that specific beef. So that's what the second bullet point is saying. When you see a beef ad, the beef checkoff ads like the ones that you regularly see, again, like the one that you see on this slide that just says just eat beef, there's a lower willingness to pay than when you see a beef checkoff ad like the one that we mocked up that says that domestic beef has differences. People are willing to pay more for that domestic beef than they would be when they think that all beef is equal. And so when you add that to the fact that they're not going to see beef as a commodity, that means they're going to go to the store and start seeking out domestic beef, and that's going to force the packers to start paying you more. It's going to force them to start purchasing more. Now, one of the arguments that we were anticipating back was, well, that may all be true, but what the checkoff does is it means that more beef is sold. And so even if people would be willing to pay more for any individual slice of beef that under these adjusted ads, the total amount of beef that would sold would be decreased, and at the end of the day, it would be either worse for ranchers or it'd be a wash. And the third bullet point disproves that. So we did test this exact issue. Both ads led to the exact same desire to purchase beef at the same level. So you could differentiate beef, you could get people to pay more, and people would still buy the same amount. So this notion that the checkoff currently is lifting all boats is just wrong. they're not lifting your boat the way they could be. They're lifting the cheapest boat when they could be making a differentiation that actually benefited you without harming anyone else. And so what Dr. DeMonte did was kind of summarize these findings as part of his conclusions. And I think they're so important, I'm going to kind of repeat some of them. They're very similar. All this is laid out in his report that's now before the court. So what he said was that there's the current beef checkoff program. What it's doing is it's creating low market differentiation. That means that people are willing to substitute any kind of beef, no matter where it comes from another kind of beef. They're not willing to put in the effort to differentiate so that all they care about is price. But if you make those very minor changes in the beef advertisements, so they no longer look like, again, the one on the right in this slide, which is a beef checkoff advertising that's been running recently, where it's just, all the ad is doing is saying, eat beef, but you give them very specific, just factual information about the differences in the beef market. People will use that information to go seek out differentiated products. So they'll no longer see beef as interchangeable, they'll see beef as having different qualities, and there'll be less competition in that market among beef producers because it's going to be a subdivided market. And how do we know that less competition is good? Well, we have general principles of economics, but we also have his third finding, which is that when people are willing to seek out specialty beef and they recognize it as a specialty product, they're actually willing to pay more. So once they see that the market is subdivided and they know that there are differences and they are willing to put in the energy to purchasing specific types of beef, particularly domestic beef, they are in fact willing to pay more for that beef once they find it. And so the market homogeneity that we see through the general beef checkoff can be really broken down. You can have subdivided markets, and that will increase the prices for everyone. And per my prior slide, it will do so without decreasing sales. So again, this is 6 nationwide surveys, more than 1,000 consumers, all confirming these, and all these were found to be statistically significant findings. USDA tried to give a rebuttal. The gentleman on the right here is the classic checkoff spokesperson. He's a professor at Cornell. And he's the person, you probably have heard Vaughn talk about this in prior years. When you hear the checkoffs raising money for all producers, he's the guy who did those studies. His name is Dr. Kaiser. He's USDA's standard go-to guy when you need to prove up that the checkoff's a good thing for producers. And the first thing, all these quotes here that you see on the screen are quotes from his sworn deposition in our case. So he was under oath. This is what he said, not what we said. So the first thing to know is that over the years, and he's been working on the checkoff basically his entire career, he told us he's personally pocketed more than $1 million of your dollars into his bank account. So he's made alone, this professor at Cornell, $1 million off of the checkoff for doing this research to try to support the program. And he said that he's gotten millions, he couldn't quantify the exact number, but millions of dollars, not just in his personal pocket, but to support his academic work. So they paid for research assistants, they paid for a center. This is a guy who has a lot of biases in favor of the checkoff from the way it personally benefits him. At the same time, when he actually tried to talk about his studies and why they justified the checkoff, but what he admitted was they don't actually look at how the checkoff impacts you all. What he is doing is he's saying, does the checkoff increase beef consumption? That's his 10,000 foot, as he put it, look. Do people eat more beef because of the checkoff? And we don't disagree with that, right? As I said to you, our study also found that if you look at those beef ads, people will buy more beef. There's no question about that. But he never bothered to look at whether there were other ways in which the checkoff could differentiate producers from each other. Could it help domestic producers more than it is? So what he's saying, I think the checkoff benefits people. We don't disagree with that, but he's not actually saying, could it be done better? Could it be done in a way that actually better supports the domestic producers that are paying into it? And so when you hear those studies and when Vaughn tries to rebut those studies, know what they're rebutting, which is studies that don't actually speak to your life and your experience and what you need. It's just, does the checkoff sell more beef? The answer is yes. You're not having the same discussion. The other thing to know is that the reason he approached this and the reason that USDA approaches the checkoff in this way and tries to have that debate is they're not actually testing the ads. Dr. Kaiser is an economist. He's good at manipulating numbers and good at putting together formulas and spreadsheets. He doesn't know anything about marketing. He doesn't teach in Cornell's marketing department. He doesn't teach classes on marketing. He's just there to kind of slice and dice the numbers in ways that he thinks makes sense. But he doesn't have the skill set, and USDA has never tried to retain the skill set to figure out whether the checkoff's actually advertising in a way that benefits you. And I think what was, for me, one of the most compelling things for the case, although probably less so for you on a day-to-day basis, he did try to slice those and dice the numbers from our studies in a way that better supported USDA. And what we ended up finding out during his deposition and through his own admissions was he just manipulated the data. He took numbers out that he should have took out. He put numbers in he shouldn't have put in. When you actually do his studies, his own formulas and his own approach correctly, he even reaches the exact same results that we do. So even though USDA has this guy out there who's supposed to ask different questions, isn't supposed to really look at the ads, just try to find whether people in general, not domestic producers, but beef producers in general, are making more money, even he couldn't slice and dice these ads in such a way, or slice and dice the studies, in such a way that he could undermine our findings, which is that there are other ways to do the checkoff. There are ways that subdivide the market, make beef look like specialty goods, and when you do that, people are willing to pay more, and producers will benefit, and there's just simple, easy changes to the checkoff that take the basic message without harming any sales, but nonetheless put more dollars back in your pockets. So what's the next step? We're going to continue to fight legally over this. We're filing the first big brief based on these studies on the next couple of weeks. The government will respond with certain procedural arguments. Maybe they'll still try to rely on this guy from Cornell. That will go back and forth for a couple of months. Eventually, we'll put it all before the court early next year. Our eventual hope is that we prove that you have standing and that the beef checkoff is, in the eyes of the law, financially injuring you. And then we eventually get them to allow us to comment on the MOUs, which will hopefully change how the money is spent, or at the very least limit how it's spent. But I think more important is what Vaughn was talking about, which is, to me, the real reason we get involved in these cases is not necessarily because of the courtroom issues, right? There are lots of procedural things that can go wrong in a case that have nothing to do with your lived experience. So our real hope, and we've been working with Bill on this, is to use the data from those studies to do things like support the Off Act, right? What we now know, regardless of all the intricacies of what is standing under the law, what's procedurally timely and correct under the law, what we now know from those studies is that you all are being harmed. And it's time, if the courts won't act, for Congress to act, and we have evidence now to support it. And so we're going to be taking this hopefully to the press, hopefully to Congress, and trying to get legislative change regardless of what happens in the court. So we'll keep on fighting for you there, and we hope to get change. But to me, the bigger message here is we now have evidence we can take in and promote to Congress, to regulators, to hopefully alter this program without the slowness of litigation. Here's my contact information. Bill has it as well. He also has these studies if you're interested. They're public and shareable. And with that, I will stop my screen share and take any questions you have.